And I am the Media Services Librarian here. I'm officially running the BSI program now, Book Sandwiched In. I'd like to thank the committee for all of your hard work. Thank you. And also, I'd like to thank the friends who sponsor this program, so you can thank them for the cookies and the tea and everything. So, and the door prize. And if you haven't entered for the door prize, please do so now. Just put your name. You don't even need to put your phone number. Just put your name on the sheet and put it in the, what do you call that? The receptacle. The jar. All right, so, and thank you, of course, to our speaker. Today's speaker is Jessica Skehan. Perfect, okay. Jessica is an artist from Holly, New York. She graduated with her Bachelor's of Fine Arts from SUNY Buffalo State University in 2019. Jessica specializes in landscape and portrait painting, though she's always expanding her creative horizons by exploring other media. Her artwork is inspired by music, literature, and nature. She enjoys adding whimsical and fantastical elements to her pieces. Jessica manages the Roz Steiner Art Gallery at GCC, as well as the box office for the theater program. Outside of the art world, she enjoys reading, sewing, doing puzzles, visiting museums, and taking dance classes at the local studio. You can find her enriching her love of history as a historic interpreter at the Genesee Country Village and Museum. As an avid reader, Jessica's favorite genres include fantasy, science fiction, and historic romance. A fun fact about Jessica is that she spent 8 months working in character entertainment at Walt Disney World. And Jessica will be reviewing for us today Provenance, How a Conman and Forger Rewrote the History of Modern Art by Lainey Salisbury and Ali Sujo. Everybody ready? Yes. I'm excited.
All right, is this angle okay for everybody? Okay. So first off, I want to thank Christina for inviting me to be here today. This book I hadn't heard of before. This is my first experience with it, but it kind of combined all of 3 of my favorite things: the love of art, history, and reading. So I'm very excited to share my thoughts on the book with you today and hopefully entice you guys to try out the book for you as well. So I'm going to start off with a Goodreads summary of the book for those of you who haven't yet started reading. So Provenance is a tautly paced investigation of one of the 20th century's most audacious art frauds, which generated hundreds of forgeries, many of them still hanging in prominent museums and private collections today. Provenance is the extraordinary narrative of one of the most far-reaching and elaborate deceptions in art history. Investigative reporters Lainey Salisbury and Ali Sujo brilliantly recount the tales of the great conman and unforgettable villain, John Drew, and his sometimes unwitting accomplices. Chief among these was a struggling artist, John Myatt, a vulnerable single father who was manipulated by Drew into becoming a prolific art forger. Once Myatt had painted the pieces, the real fraud began. Drew managed to infiltrate the archives of the upper echelons of the British art world in order to fake the provenances of Myatt's forged pieces, hoping to irrevocably legitimize the fakes while effectively rewriting modern art history. The story stretches from London to Paris and even into New York, from Tony Manhattan art galleries and to the esteemed Giacometti and Dubuffet associations, to the Tate archives at the Tate Gallery. The enormous swindle resulted in the introduction of at least 200 forged paintings, some of them breathtakingly good, and most of them selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many of these fakes are still out in the world, considered genuine and hung prominently in private houses, large galleries, and prestigious museums. And the sacred archives, undermined by John Drew, remain tainted to this day. Provenance reads like a well-plotted thriller, filled with unforgettable characters, told at breakneck pace, but it is most certainly not fiction. Provenance is the meticulously researched and captivating account of one of the greatest cons in the history of art forgery. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our 2 authors here. So first, Lainey Salisbury. She has a BA in English from the University of Pennsylvania. She attended graduate school at Columbia University, where she graduated with her Master of Science in Journalism. Once she finished school, she spent 5 years working as a freelance journalist, traveling to Africa and the Middle East to report global news. She later joined the Associated Press in 1993, where she wrote and edited international stories for the readers in the USA. She wrote featured articles on various topics for the outlet. In 1995, she took a job with Reuters. She reported and edited financial news, focusing on specialized topics, including energy markets and biotechnology. She continued editing international and domestic news stories for the US and international subscribers. In 2003, she published her first novel, The Cruelest Miles, the heroic story of dogs and men in the race against an epidemic, which told the story of historic dog sled teams that braved the Alaskan wilderness to bring life-saving serum to Nome, Alaska, to combat the deadly diphtheria outbreak in 1925. This was, if you know the story of Baltimore Togo, it inspired the Iditarod Trail race as well. The book was being developed for a movie, but as far as I can tell, it was never complete. The book was co-authored by her cousin Gay Salisbury. And then in 2009 is when she published Provenance, How a Conman and a Forger Rewrote the History of Modern Art, along with her husband Ali Sujo. The book received many accolades, including being on the ALA Notable Books list, Oprah's Top 4 Summer Reading Picks, the Barnes & Noble Best Literary Nonfiction Picks list, and was an Edgar Award finalist. She has been working as a professor of journalism at the University of Albany since 2007. She continues to work as a freelance writer and has been a guest lecturer at other universities, including SUNY Stony Brook, which you can find one of her lectures on YouTube as well. So finding more information about Ali Sujo was a little bit harder. Ali Sujo was the son of a New York art gallery owner, which likely played a part in his interest in the Drew scandal. Sujo spent time visiting family and friends around the world, including in London, England, Caracas, Venezuela, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. He lived in Woodstock, New York with his wife and his daughter. Sujo spent 20 years working as a journalist, where he covered arts, entertainment, and foreign news for Reuters, the Associated Press, and the New York Daily News. He passed away suddenly in late 2008, just months before Provenance would be published in 2009. He and Lane had already completed the manuscript, so Provenance is his only novel under his belt. What is provenance? The definition of provenance is history of ownership of a valued object, a work of art, or literature. It's a paper trail used to indicate a piece that has been obtained properly. For the museum and art trade, it helps in establishing authorship. Not everyone always signs their work. And it helps with authenticating a piece of art or an artifact. Provenance has become increasingly important to help establish the moral and legal validity of the chain of custody, given the increasing amount of looted and stolen art or antiquities around the world. For modern artwork, sometimes provenance can be as simple as a photograph of an item with its original owner. Provenance documentation can come in forms of gallery invoices or receipts, auction records, certificates of authenticity, exhibition catalogs, or catalog raisonnées, which are scholarly publications of an artist's complete work, sometimes including in provenance notes. Luke Kelly of the UMFA Association says provenance is essentially the recorded journey of an artwork from its origin through one or more of its owners to the present day. Art historians and curators use this information to provide more context for a work. An object story might include a famous collector or a period when it was part of a larger collection. Provenance research can also help attribute or authenticate a work of art, clarifying or confirming who made it. More importantly, provenance helps museums ensure the objects they are collecting meet legal and ethical rules. There are 3 particularly critical categories of provenance museums must pay attention to. The whereabouts of European artworks collected between 1933 and 1945, when the Nazi regime forced sales and looted thousands of artworks from the Jewish collections. Archaeological artifacts collected before 1970, when the United Nations passed accords to protect the world's cultural heritage, and art taken from the colonized regions in the 19th century and early 20th centuries, when colonial powers looted or illegally removed works from these cultural locales. So in 1970, UNESCO convened, UNESCO meaning the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. In 1970, the Convention on the Means for Prohibiting and Preventing Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Properties urged the state parties to take measures to prohibit and prevent the illicit trafficking of cultural property. It provided a common framework for the state parties on the measures to be taken to prohibit and prevent the export and transfer of cultural properties. The return and restitution of a cultural property is central to the convention, and it is not only the duty to remember, but to fundamentally safeguard the identity of peoples and promote peaceful societies, whereby the spirit of solidarity will be strengthened. By the 1950s, more states were gaining independence. The young nations sought to create an international treaty to combat illicit trafficking of cultural property. Their concern was mainly related to the growth of black market during this time period, and particularly to this dismemberment of monuments and ancient sites to meet demand. The convention brought UNESCO to the forefront of the fight against illicit trafficking of stolen arts, antiquities, and other pieces of cultural heritage. Prevention takes a central role in this by creating safeguards for transporting cultural property, which includes the establishment of inventories, export certifications, the application of controls and approval of traders, the application of criminal and administrative sanctions, and the organization of information and education campaigns. Nicholas Penny, the National Gallery Director of the Close Examinations, Fakes, Mistakes, and Discoveries exhibit about forged artwork, said, "I wish we had more fakes in this collection. You only get good at spotting them by seeing them." Information and education campaigns brought on by UNESCO are helping with that education program. The convention states parties should adopt protection measures in their territories. They should elaborate draft appropriate national legislation. They should establish national services for the protection of cultural heritage. They should promote museums, libraries, and archives, establish national inventories, encourage adoption of codes of conduct for dealers in cultural property, and implement educational programs to develop respect for cultural heritage. They should also control the movement of cultural properties. They should introduce a system of export certifications, prohibit the export of cultural property unless it is accompanied by an export certificate, prevent museums from buying objects exported from another state party without an export certificate. They should prohibit the import of objects stolen from museums, religious institutions, or public monuments. There should be penal sanctions to be imposed on any person contravening these prohibitions. An emergency import ban may be adopted when cultural heritage of a state party is seriously endangered by intense looting of archaeological and ethnological artifacts. And it requires art dealers to maintain a register of the exact origins of each object that they purchase. So, our who's who of our story. John Drew is our main character and our villain. He claimed to be a professor, a physicist, an agent for the works of Alberto Giacometti. He was an art researcher, a historian working on a groundbreaking study of artwork lost during World War II. He claimed to be an unofficial diplomatic go-between in the process of organizing reciprocal post-war reparations between Germany and Russia. He said he was an entrepreneur developing a database to connect lost paintings to their owners. Ironic. He also claimed he was the head of Northland Research, which was a shell company that he had developed. He said he was a consultant for the Ministry of Defense, amongst other things. He also claimed that he was to inherit John Catch's extensive art collection, who he claimed was a wealthy patron of the Atomic Energy Authority. This is where he claimed many of his paintings had come from, and used it in his fake provenances. The mastermind behind the greatest art scam of the 20th century, and when the fake paintings were questioned on authenticity, he learned how to forge these provenances. So next up is John Myatt. He is our forger in this scam. John Myatt worked as a part-time art teacher who had been an artistic and musical promise as a child. He spent a few years working for the music publishing company as a studio musician. He always longed to be an accomplished, sought-after artist, like those he saw hanging on the walls of London galleries. He was a desperate single father who was ripe for Drew's picking. He painted his first fake for his boss, which was Oral Duffy, which later led him to publish an ad in a satirical London magazine offering to paint genuine fakes for £150. This is how Drew found him and pulled him into his scheme. He painted fake paintings for Drew, not knowing that they were being sold as real works by other famous artists, until Myatt accompanied Drew to a reception at the Tate Gallery. And he recognized two of the series that Drew donated and were actually forgeries he himself had painted. After a brief argument that night where Myatt insisted Drew recover the paintings and told him that they would be caught because he didn't believe his work was good enough to pass as a emissary, he continued to work for Drew for a total of 6 years. He is said to have made about 100,000 pounds from selling Drew his forgeries, which is just a little more than he would have earned as a part-time teacher at that time had he continued in that profession. He estimates that he created over 200 pieces for Drew to sell at art forgeries. So here are some of his genuine fakes that he paints. He created his fakes with emulsion paint, house paint, and KY jelly. He sometimes added varnish to finish a piece and to, quote, age it. Then Drew would take it and smear coffee grounds on it, dirt on it, try to make it look like it was older than it actually was. Myatt was a relatively poor man, so he couldn't afford artist-grade oil paints. So towards the end of his time working with Drew, he brought Drew his Giacometti crayon and pencil forgery that he had made. Drew remarked, quote, "I don't think you realize, John, that this is a classic example of the artist's work. It's powerful, simple, and symbolic. You don't know how important this is." To which Myatt responded, "I know what it is. I bloody painted it." Drew clenched his jaw and told Myatt never to say that again. Myatt remembers wondering then if Drew was losing touch with reality. The next day he called Drew and made the argument that they should quit the game altogether, but Drew refused. So you can also go onto Myatt's website. This is where I got these pictures from. He still sells prints of these paintings that he does. So we have a relatively large cast of characters. So I tried to pick out just the ones that meant the most to the story, the ones who popped up repeatedly throughout the novel. So Bathsheba Goldsmith. She was Drew's common-law wife and mother of 2 children. She originally worked in the Israeli Defense Force, but later moved to London. She lost many family members in the Holocaust and had a falling out with Drew over a few paintings from, quote, John Ketch's art collection belonging to his German-born brother, a former director at the IG Farben, which was the notorious German chemical company that made the poison gas for the Nazi death chambers. Drew said that the brother had been given these paintings in recognition for his services to the Third Reich. This, of course, was all a lie because there was no art collection that Drew was selling off for John Ketch. So I think that he was using this to drive a wedge between them because they would later on go on to break up and have a very contentious affair after that, trying to get things that were in each other's possessions. Goldsmith originally worked as a doctor until her falling out with Drew, who then destroyed her reputation and took the children's custody. She was key to the investigation into Drew's art fraud. And then we have Armand Bartos Jr., who was a New York art dealer who insisted that the Giacometti he purchased from Drew was the best he had ever seen. There's Renee Gimple, who was a 4th-generation art dealer who had a sinking suspicion his Ben Nicholson watercolor was fake. Peter Nahum, the London art dealer who was the first to alert Scotland Yard's Art and Antiquities Squad that he had been hoodwinked by a rogue. And then John Spare, an antiquarian bookstore owner whose shop became a source of material and inspiration for Drew's elaborate Provenance scheme. Father Paul Addison was the head of the Roman Catholic religious order in England, whose goodwill Drew abuses to claim provenance of the works of centuries-old priories. Danny Berger, a neighbor recruited by Drew to sell forged paintings by modern masters out of his garage. Sheila Maskell, New York's based art runner who sends Armand Bartos the Giacometti standing nude that will eventually break the case open. And Clive Bellman, who was an unemployed former jewelry salesman who gets recruited by Drew, not knowing the paintings he's selling aren't the real deal. So as you can kind of gather as we go through the cast list here, Drew tends to take advantage of people who are down on their luck, people who are poor, unemployed, having a hard time financially. He's able to swipe them up and kind of get them into his scheme. And most of the time when they first started out, they didn't know that he was running a forgery ring, so they believed that what they were selling was true. There's also Mary Lisa Palmer, who was the director of the Giacometti Association, who persisted whose persistent detective work puts her in conflict with auction houses and galleries, as she refuses to authenticate any of the Giacometti paintings that Maya painted, and she suspected they were forgery from the get-go. Jennifer Booth was the Tate archivist who refused to be swayed by Drew's benefactor status at the Tate, and is immediately skeptical of his intent. She keeps tracks of his visits to the archives and alerts her superiors to her suspicions, but she is told she is worrying for nothing. Richard Higgs is a London detective who cannot pin a case of arson on John Drew, but knows he has spotted a scam artist. Mickey Bolt was a Scotland Yard detective from the Organized Crime Union. He had very little experience in the art world, but is essential at building a case. He is personally asked to join the case against Drew by Searle. Jonathan Searle was Scotland Yard's detective with a Cambridge pedigree in art history, which comes in handy when spotting fakes. He is the one who heads up the case against Drew after taking it over. So our art inspirations. There's a number of different artists that Maya was usually painting. Sometimes John Drew would come to him with a specific artist or painting in mind and ask him to recreate it. Other times he would give Maya those reins and say, who do you feel like painting this week? Being a trained artist, John Maya he recognized different artwork. He would often go around to the London galleries and museums, and he would study their paintings of all these masters as well. A lot of what he ended up painting ended up being more of the abstract imagery. So we're going to focus on Ben Nicholson, Alberto Giacometti, Roger Basser, Henri Matisse, Marc Chagall, Le Corbusier, Georges Braque, Jean Dubuffet, and Graham Sutherland. These are the artists that he repeatedly painted and the ones that were passed off as real for most of his forging time period. So Ben Nicholson, his is on the top left, it's the square one. Ben Nicholson's father was an acclaimed painter, Sir William Nicholson, who was famously a master of the genre, and Ben credited his father for his early interest in art. Of course I owe a lot to my father, especially to his poetic idea and to his still life theme. That didn't come from Cubism, it came from my father. Despite the generous attribution of his success to his father, Nicholson's exposure to Cubism in Paris in the 1920s and the 1930s, and his friendship with Georges Braque, played a significant role in his continual return to the genre. The interlocking shapes and planes and the balance between the lines and section of color in the still life clearly allude to the Cubist influences, more specifically to Picasso and Braque's synthetic Cubism, that they developed further together in the first decade of the 20th century. The kind of painting which I find, quote, the kind of painting which I find exciting is not necessarily representational or non-representational, but it is both musical and architectural, where the architectural construction is used to express a musical relationship between form, tone, and color. So the one I have put up there is titled Still Life Speckled. It was painted during March 1949, and Sotheby's had it estimated to be worth 400,000 to 600,000 pounds at auction. And then we have the Alberto Giacometti, which is the one figural piece down on the bottom right. It's titled Rita, which he painted in 1965, and it is an oil on canvas. Giacometti's portraits can be painted or sculpted, and they are a translation of the model as an implacable otherness, which can never be grasped in its entirety. These portraits, devoid of all emotion and expression, are the receptacle of what the spectator brings to them. What was involved for the artist was capturing and rendering the vibration of life of his models and not their psychology. He often painted the people around him, mainly his friends and family. He worked from memory and built the figure up from the skeletal system. And then the Roger Basser composition in blue is the bottom left. He painted that in 1959. He was a French painter known for his unique contribution to Cubism. Along with his paintings, Basser also produced a set of stained glass windows for the cathedral in the town of Metz. The good, quote, the good painter is the one who varies a color every day, he said. In 1910, he moved to Paris and befriended André Lotte and Georges Braque. In Paris, he began painting in a Cubist idiom that was influenced by an interest in Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot and Pablo Picasso's neoclassical work. However, by the 1950s, Besserer had adopted a much more abstract approach to produce paintings, in which he used stains of rich color to compose each work rather than a representational form. And then lastly, for the example, I have a Henri Matisse, which is titled A Glimpse of Notre Dame in the Late Afternoon in 1902. And if you head up to the Albright Knox Gallery in Buffalo, you can actually see this one on display because they have that in their collection. Henri Matisse was a French painter, draftsman, and sculptor, as well as a printmaker. He was known for his use of color. His work is regarded as responsible for laying the foundation of modern plastic arts, along with the work of Pablo Picasso and Marcel Duchamp. At the age of 18, he went to study law, working as a court administrator. But after a bout of appendicitis, during which his mother gave him paints and an easel to pass the time, he soon began drawing and left law school to pursue his art career to the dismay of his father. His work, characterized as a fauve or wild, often was met with harsh criticism, which made it hard for him to provide for his wife and children. Due to the vehement hatred of his work, his Blue Nude was burned in 1913 at the Armory exhibition in Chicago. Although he had harsh critics, he had loving followers, including Gertrude Stein and her family. Throughout the years of 1907 and 1911, his friends organized and financed an art school, the Academy of Matisse, in which Matisse could instruct young artists. So now we're going to talk about the forged provenances. It all started with Drew conning his way into the Institute of Contemporary Art's archives. He stole numerous letters, correspondences, and receipts. John Drew wrote fake letters from his aliases as character references while he tried to scheme his way into the archives at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Now with access to these archives, he began to add fake pages to auction catalogs to create a fake history for his fake paintings. Quote, he would alter the records and seed them with his own alternative history, a reconstructed chronicle that would include the names of real and invented collectors and would revolve around the works he commissioned from Myatt. The archives are, quote, he also told Myatt that the archives are on the lookout for people taking material out, not for people putting it in, which is why it took so long for him to get caught. In order to create false provenances, Drew would recreate stamps, seals, and embosses for defunct galleries and religious communities like St. Philip's Priory to place on the back of canvases. Using a gallery that was no longer in existence made it harder to track down whether or not a piece had been in their possession, as their catalogs and archives were often sold out to other establishments. Provenance is a fluid construct. A single piece of memorabilia can bring to life an otherwise morbid-bound pile of receipts and invoices. A fully loaded provenance with details of a work's trajectory throughout the marketplace can add substantially to the price. Further, if there's any hint that the work was once associated with a celebrity or a scandal, infamy, or criminal endeavor, its value may increase significantly. Collectors have been known to arrange to have a painting stolen and subsequently recovered to add to their value. More often, however, a work's provenance might consist of a single bill of sale, one catalog, or a passing mention in an old letter. So we've got pictures here of the different museums and galleries that he was trying to get access to, which he succeeded in. So we've got the Tate Modern, which is up top, and then we've got the Victoria and Albert interior for one of their galleries, and then the Hanover Gallery interior as well. So what's changed? As of the writing of this book, it's estimated that anywhere from 20% to 40% of works on the art market are fakes or genuinely old pieces that have been doctored to fit a more valuable style or artist. Thomas Hoving said in that his 18 years at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, during which he examined some 50,000 pieces of art, 40% of them were either phonies or so hypocritically restored or so misattributed that they were just the same as forgeries. Italy's art carabinieri, whose job is to police the country's cultural heritage, claimed to have seized more than 60,000 fakes during the 1990s alone. And yet, despite the growing awareness of the prevalence of forgeries and an array of sophisticated technology using infrared and ultraviolet light, the most rigorous scholars and prestigious institutions can still be taken in by fakes. Han van Meegeren was a failed artist who wanted to prove his worth by painting in the style of the great artists of the past, specifically 17th century Dutch painter Jan Vermeer. He went so far as to use badger hair brushes the tools of the era, and ground out his own pigments and oil of lilac, and topped his canvases with a resin mixture that gave the paint an enamel-like finish. He would then bake the canvas in the oven for 2 hours to harden the paint. Van Meegeren later confessed to the forgery after being charged with collaborating to sell a Dutch national treasure to a Nazi commander because they believed his fakes were authentic. He said, quote, "Yesterday this picture was worth millions of guilders, and experts and art lovers would come from around the world and pay money to see it. Today it is worth nothing, and nobody would cross the street to see it for free. But the picture has not changed. What has?" Eric Hebborn brought his forgery to a grand scale. In 1984, he confessed that he had produced thousands of forgeries in the style of the old masters, and boasted that many had landed in esteemed collections, including the National Gallery in DC, the British Museum, and the Morgan Library and Museum in New York. To Hebborn, the production of fakes was an intellectual exercise, as well as an attempt to confound the art market. He failed to see the criminality in his actions and claimed that he was a fair player because he was leveling the playing field. He had a rule to never sell a work of art to someone who was not a recognized expert and was not acting on expert advice. Quote, "No drawing can lie of itself. It is only the opinion of the expert that can deceive." In the cases of Drew and Myatt, Van Meegeren, and Hebborn, they all raise the same basic question about what makes art valuable. If a drawing is a good one, does it have the same intrinsic worth even if it's not by the artist it purports to be by? If a fake, quote, "If a fake is so expert that even the most thorough and trustworthy examination of its authenticity is still open to doubt, is it or is it not as satisfactory as a work of art as if it were unequivocally genuine?" And that's attributed to Aline Saarinen. The art world's greatest forgers are either seen as beloved outlaws or Philistine rogues. Forged artwork takes on a life of its own after being introduced to the market. A famous fake can become valuable to a collector because of its notorious story and extensive provenance. As a forged artwork travels around to different collectors, museums, and galleries, it amasses a legitimate trail of ownership that therein becomes valuable itself. Scotland Yard's Art and Antiquities Squad has since recruited curators and art historians to serve as special constables. This Art Beat constables were given 4 weeks of police training and procedure, and they patrol antiques markets around London. Hundreds of collectors remain oblivious to the fact that many of their masterpieces are fakes. Many galleries and museums have held exhibitions in art forgery. Art and Artifice, Fakes of the Collection, at the London Portal Gallery was presented in 2023. So these are all still relatively within the past few years that these exhibitions have been going on. This exhibition showcases fakes from the gallery's own collection, some donated for educational purposes, and others discovered after the acquisition, including a forgery by Han Van Meegeren. Intent to Deceive, Fakes and Forgeries in the Art World, an exhibit put together by the International Arts and Artists profiles notorious forgers such as Elmer de Hory and Mark Landis, displaying their works alongside masterpieces and examining the techniques and technology used to authenticate an art. The Art of Imitation exhibition brings together objects from all departments of the British Museum collection. Some entered the museum in error, while others were knowingly acquired for their historical significance. Many are rarely, if ever, on open display, while others feature prominently in the public galleries. From fake news to the future of replication, the British Museum team asks what defines authenticity and why it matters, and this will open next October at their museum. The Rise of Fakes asks the question, what makes art valuable? Is it the technical expertise of the artist? Is it the story or inspiration behind a work of art? Is it the signature squiggled in the bottom corner of the canvas or on the work's extensive provenances? Is it how the art connects to the viewer and the emotional response it elicits from them? The existence of forgeries forces the art world to confront what constitutes good art and whether those guidelines need to change. In the current digital age, where computers, cameras, and photocopiers have made it easier than ever to make a document look authentic, curators, archivists, and other museum professionals have to be more diligent than ever when authenticating a piece or a provenance. So, my recommendation on this book. I think it is very easy to read, it's very accessible. They use mostly plain language and any vocabulary that you might not be familiar with, whether it's within art culture, museum culture, or within any of the law enforcement agencies over in Europe. The authors make sure to use context and definition so that you are able to get the gist of what's going on. Provenance is fast-paced and it reads like a thriller. The chapters are short, which helps to keep the momentum going, and it never felt like I was reading a textbook, which I greatly appreciate when it comes to reading nonfiction. I'm very picky. The hardest thing about this book for me was keeping track of the side characters. As you can see, when we went through two, there was a lot of them, and I left off some off of our list. But the author provides character reference sheets at the beginning of the book for those individuals who pop up multiple times throughout your story. So as you're reading, if you forget a name because you haven't heard them in 3 chapters, you can go back to the front of the book and reference, and it'll list out who they are, what their role in this was, and whether they belong to a museum, gallery, archive, the such. And you don't have to be interested in art to enjoy this. I think it appeals to anyone who is interested in crime or mysteries. So if you want to learn more, I have some different links up here, as well as some different pieces of media that you can look into if you want to learn more about art forgery, the art world in general, some of the different things I referenced here in my presentation today. Netflix has a really good cache of different documentaries about art forgery and art heists. Crash Course has an art history on YouTube, so you can take their course for free. I think it's a 10-part series that goes through history of art, as well as talking about all of these kind of philosophical questions that we've talked about today. What makes good art? And then there's also a little brief interview with Lainey Salisbury on YouTube. I think it's a 5-minute clip that talks about specifically her writing this book and what it was like for her to interview all of these people. All right, and that's it. Anyone has any questions, I am more than happy to answer. If anyone has any comments too. Yeah.
The forgers don't mimic an existing painting, they just paint in the style?
It depends. So when Mike was first starting out with Drew, he would often paint existing paintings, so he was creating the same painting over again. But when he had first started out, before Drew had contacted him, he was usually painting in the style of other people for his clients that he was getting. So it just depends on whether they're running a scam or not.
The movie The Last Premiere, was that based on that case? Are you familiar with that film?
Oh, no, I'm not.
Yeah, it's The Last Premiere, and it's a good film.
Yeah, I would say that it was Van Meergren was the one who was doing the Vermeer paintings, I believe.
Well, this one man is on trial for...
I will have to look into that, thank you.
And the monuments man.
Yes, I have seen that one. That is a great one to talk about the historic context around all the pieces being looted back during World War II, so.
Yeah, I'm more my favorite.
Yeah, me too. I haven't read the book yet, though,
Oh,
so I
I've
think
read
I've
the
got to
book.
compare them.
And the book it really mimics it. They did a very good job in the film, I think.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Right. There's also a documentary by Penn Jillette for Penn and Teller called Tim's Vermeer, where it's the guy who invented, not Dolby, because that's Dolby, but one of those like computer programs, sound programs. He decided he was going to paint a Vermeer, not to steal, but to learn how he did it. So he creates a camera obscura, which is, he goes to Amsterdam, he buys 2 rooms, sets one up just like Vermeer, because if you look at Vermeer's paintings, they're like all in the same room. They just put different stuff on the wall, because the window's the same. And then he learned how to do it with a camera obscura, so upside down. So he didn't have any painting training whatsoever, and he learned David Hockney's in it.
Okay.
But if you want to look at like the techniques of that, it does explore all that stuff. He wasn't trying to fool anybody, and he painted a beautiful, beautiful painting from not painting ever in his life, in like several months.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, part of our training for centuries at this point has been studying the works of the masters. So sometimes if you're going to visit an art museum or a gallery, you might see somebody with an easel set up, painting in front of another painting. And it's all in trying to learn from their techniques and learn what you can from them. So that, if you're doing it for the educational purposes, you're keeping it for yourself, you're not out there selling it or trying to pass it off as an original, then that's totally fine. And to piggyback too on the how he was learning from painting in the camera obscura, John Myatt, our forger, actually has some TV series with Sky TV, and one of them is that he teaches novices how to find their inner artist. He was able to recover fairly well from the scandal.
I find it interesting that the investigators, all the investigators involved, and some of the staff were suspicious, and the art dealers and the galleries weren't that suspicious. So
Right.
that's kind of strange. I'm sure this was a huge embarrassment for the galleries.
Yeah.
Super huge.
Yeah, they talk about it in the book too, because I didn't want to give too much of the main points away. But they talk about how a lot of these gallery owners were taken aback that like, oh, this is a lost piece by a famous artist that was never seen before, and so all of that was too enticing for them. So so they let that Provenance
Too much money
slide.
involved, right?
Yeah, so they were like, we're gonna get so much money from showcasing this artwork. I don't need all that documentation, it'll be fine. So yeah, because of that, even still to this day, Tate, I believe, and the Victoria and Albert still have up in their archives that their signage that says that our archives have been tainted. So some of the information you might be finding may not be accurate. So yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting that Scotland Yard detectives had art history degrees. I think that is fabulous. And I feel like I wanted to talk to students now, like if they want to pursue something with law enforcement and arts, like that is an actual thing you can do. I didn't even think about that before. But on the, not related to the fine arts per se, but over the past like couple of years, I got into like restoring handbags and specifically Coach bags.
Okay.
And there is like a very big community that is supporting people trying to like learn how to authenticate, because there's so many fakes out there. And there were fakes of the bags in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. There's fakes of them now. And it's really interesting because you said that they're using like technology, but what I'm seeing in like the handbag world is that they're using something called super fakes to train AI. So when the AI like thing that resellers are using to be like, oh, this is real.
Right.
What they do is they train it on like a super fake bag.
Oh, wow.
So to me, I feel like with art and all this other stuff, the human element's gonna be even more important when it comes to like figuring out what's real and what's not.
Yeah. And they also point out in the story too, there are people within like the conservation departments within these museums that when John Drew was trying to pass off these images as real, they would get down to the conservation department and they would look at it and go, something is itching the back of my brain, something doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And it would usually pass through too quickly for them to actually get their hands on it and do any type of analysis. But like if you were to take a paint sample or to take a closer look at the back of the canvases, a lot of times that would tell you the age of the piece. So they could tell through that way. I did see, obviously I don't know much about the fake bags thing, but I did see that a lot of times they have to look at the actual like construction and the interior, or like take apart the bags themselves to figure out whether they're real or not, which is just crazy.
And you see a lot of fakes at like Goodwill and Salvation Army and everything, and I always like, if I'm with my husband, I'm like, that's a fake bag, that's a fake bag. And it's true that once you spot more fakes, it's easier to do it, but you do have to train your eye, and you also have to like physically feel it. So I think it's also really fascinating because you said that, you know, the one artist was using the same types of materials. I mean, Myatt couldn't because he couldn't afford it, but the other guy did.
Yeah.
And likewise, in the handbag world, there are people who are like buying the same leathers as like Hermes and all these things. So they're buying the leather from the tanneries and they're trying to like mimic all these stitches, and then like, what's the difference? What's real versus what's not? If it's the exact same design and the same materials, then what's the difference between it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That goes right back to the art critic saying, what does it matter if it's a quality image? You just have a name on it. Is the name selling or is the artwork selling?
Right.
Is the quality of the bag selling or is the name of the bag selling?
Right.
And it gets even more complicated when you start to like hear accounts from other artists and creators doing this. Picasso was approached by one of his collectors who bought art from him before and asked him to sign a piece that didn't have his signature on it. And he looked at it and he's like, I don't think this is mine, but okay. And he realized it wasn't his, but because the guy had bought so much artwork from him, he was like, I'm not gonna tell him now that he spent all this money on something that's not mine. And if it looks close enough to mine, I might as well just let him keep it. So yeah, he signed it and